welcome everybody. I know there's some more folks trickling in. I'm going to get started with some basic housekeeping. So welcome again. Thank you for joining us for Tipping Point today. This is our last day of the conference. For those of you not familiar, Tipping Point is Connecticut's first affordable housing conference series. My name is Kylie Goslin. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. And throughout the week, the partnership has been hosting over 30 sessions featuring local, state, and national experts, leading conversations that explore challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around critical next steps to address key affordable housing issues here in the state of Connecticut. You can join the conversation about Tipping Point on Twitter at #TippingPoint2020, and you can follow us at @PSC Housing if you aren't already. This morning, we're excited to have Nandini Natarajan from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority here with us. Before I introduce her, I just want to walk through a couple of housekeeping items with you. First of all, this session or this opening remarks that Nandini is about to present will be followed by a QAP listening session that CHFA will be hosting. That is all part of the same session, so you don't need to log off of this and log back in at the end of those remarks. If you're staying for the QAP listening session, just stay on this Zoom meeting, and if you are leaving, feel free to leave at the end of those remarks. Wanted to thank, as always, our sponsors, our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Melville Charitable Trust. Their deep support has allowed this conference series to exist this week. And thanks also to our collaborating sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing, and to our supporting sponsors, Housing Enterprises, Inc. and Whittlesey. Just a note that this session is being recorded. We're going to make all recordings available to conference attendees as soon as possible. You'll find those on our website, which is pschousing.org. Again, as I noted before, this is a webinar format, so you've entered muted and will remain on mute unless someone has asked you to unmute. And we'll walk through the Q&A and listening session portion after Nandini's remarks for the QAP listening session. If you have any technology issues during this, please enter those into the chat function and we'll do our best to resolve them. Just note that it's a tech issue when you enter that comment. I think that is it for now. So with that, I'm going to introduce our wonderful CHFA CEO, Nandini Natarajan. She is the first female CEO in CHFA's 50-year history, which seems like an incredibly long time coming to me. Before she joined CHFA, she was the CFO at the Illinois Housing Development Authority. And prior to that, she was at Kane Mitter. Kane Mitter is an advisory firm that specializes in affordable housing finance. She has computer science bachelor's and master's degrees from Smith and UMass, respectively, so is not unfamiliar to the New England region. She's been a wonderful addition to CHFA, and it's my pleasure to introduce her this morning as our keynote speaker for Tipping Point. Thanks, Nandini.
Thank you, Kylie. So good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know how to say my name, it's Nandini Natarajan. And as Kylie just said, I'm the CEO of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. I've been here for just over a year, and it's been quite a year. We're proud to be one of the sponsors of this event today. I want to congratulate you, Kylie, and your staff for picking up the baton from the ACA. I have personally been on a few of the sessions this week, and I hope to binge watch more this weekend. But I've walked away from all of them with insight, inspiration, and information. So very exciting to be here today and speak to you all. It's an incredibly scary time for us in our state, our country, our nation, and even our species. So what better time than now to come together virtually, unfortunately, but still together, and unite in a way to really find ways to work together to advance the mission of a basic human right, which is safe and stable, affordable housing. You may have heard that CHFA recently completed a new strategic plan. It is an ambitious plan. It is a 3-year plan. I don't know what I was thinking, but jokes aside, we're probably not going to do all of the work we set out to do in year 1, 2, or 3, but we're going to try incredibly hard. It's not CHFA's first strategic plan. It certainly is not going to be our last, but it is an important milestone at a time when affordable housing needs are at their greatest. I want to thank all of you who participated earlier this year through your involvement in surveys and meetings and focus groups. All of that information has poured itself into this plan. And like I said, it is ambitious and hopes to be impactful. Before we started the work of the plan, we sat down with the board and we talked to them about how we reimagine the mission, vision, and values of CHFA. Our mission is set by statute, so there's kind of not a lot we can do there. The mission is the mission. The vision is what is going to guide our work in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. And what we envision for this state is that we not try to help 1 or 2 people, we try to help everybody. And I know that sounds crazy. How could we possibly do that? But that's exactly what a vision is. It's far-reaching, because if you don't reach for that highest goal, then you're always going to fall short. And so our vision is that we want to help all low and moderate income residents of Connecticut have housing choice. We want to be able to give them the self-direction of being able to determine where they want to live, whether it's in cities or suburbs. We're not going to tell them where to live. We're going to help them get there. And we're going to provide as many choices as possible on their way there, as well as the ability to live in safe, environmentally sustainable housing at a time when the environment is most impacted by human action, as well as the ability to live in communities that are actually economically thriving is going to determine a person's trajectory in the future. And this is a very important part of the work we did, because it enables us to imagine what our work might result in. In addition to that, we created 5 policy priorities. I'm not going to go into each of them in detail. I don't have that kind of time, but you can go on the website and you can see our entire strategic plan. But I will speak to a couple of those policy priorities. The policy priorities are intended to be guideposts along the way for us, so that every time we create a new program or we start a new initiative, we use these as ways of checking in to make sure that they are in line with the priorities that have been set by the board. One of those is partnerships. You're all partners to us. We have other partners. We have partnerships that currently exist that may not be being leveraged to their fullest extent. There may be new ones that we're unaware of that we should be leveraging or creating or cultivating. And so as we move forward, we have to realize, CHFA has to realize, that we're not the only people in the state that are working on this problem. We are not the only lender. We're not the only allocator. And we're not the only minds that can come together to solve the problems in front of us. And so we're going to be looking to all of our partners in a very inclusive way to have a seat at the table. And sometimes CHFA is not at that proverbial table. So how do we find ways to do that more effectively and more inclusively is an incredibly important policy priority for us as we move forward. Another policy priority is going beyond business as usual. That sounds like a cliche, but it really isn't. I don't think there are very many sort of, aha moments left in this industry, but there are some. There are ways we could be looking around us in these United States to find how others are tackling similar problems and not reinventing the wheel. And so in a way, although that is not technically outside business as usual, it is, because CHFA has grown into a pattern of how it does business, right? It's just, it happens to many organizations. And so to kind of get out of that cycle, we do have to look around us and we have to ask those hard questions. As an example of how we're already doing that work, I want to point you to home ownership. Owning a home is still the best way to begin building wealth, even in a high cost, high tax state like Connecticut. Our first-time homebuyer programs make that possible. However, you've heard from speakers this week, like Jackie Rabe Thomas and Alan Malik, who've pointed to the continuing disparities in home ownership rates, and it's based on race. So one of the things we've realized at CHFA is that one of the biggest impediments to home ownership is saving up the cash, and you need a lot of it. I just bought a home a year ago and I couldn't believe how high closing costs were. You have to have a lot of cash to actually even enter into the home. And so recently we've updated our guidelines to reverse a policy that was put into place a few years ago. We now allow closing costs to be folded into the down payment assistance we provide to first-time home buyers. It's not going to be everything to everybody, but it is an important first step. When I first got here, I was a little surprised that down payment assistance loans are only 30% of our entire first-time homebuyer production across the country. That number is a lot higher. It's in the 90+%. And so we want to be able to use our products more effectively to help first-time homebuyers achieve the dream of home ownership. At the same time, we're planning to increase our outreach to minority communities, as well as areas of the state that are currently underserved, to make people aware of CHFA's products, access to homebuyer education, not only at the point of home ownership, but more generally financial fitness, how to make people aware of how to plan and budget for home ownership, how to improve their credit score, and how to understand the process of home buying. But I can imagine that many of you are not here today because of home ownership. You're here today because of multifamily. We're here to talk about the QAP, among other things. So increasing the production of multifamily housing is just as important to CHFA. It's a key part of our strategic plan. But as I said earlier, we're not the only lender at the table. We can't do it all by ourselves, but we can be an important partner in all of that. A big important part of our strategic plan is financial innovation. Financial innovation is in some ways just looking around and saying what other people are doing in other states and bringing those best practices to Connecticut. And sometimes it's creating new opportunities that just haven't been leveraged, that are perhaps unique to Connecticut. One of those I'm really excited to talk about today is the Opportunity Fund. It's a fund that the board has approved as part of our strategic plan. It's going to be funded each year using excess revenues from CHFA's other lending activities. And the intent of this fund is to provide resources that would otherwise not be available to make affordable housing that would otherwise not come to fruition become successful. It's intended to be a source for interest rate subsidies or gap financing or other soft resources that could be leveraged along with CHFA first mortgage financing to make a deal financially feasible or stronger where otherwise it would not have happened. I'm really excited about this new direction, and we hope to implement it starting in 2021. I know a lot of you who work with us know that the work we do with you does not end with an application. It continues beyond that for 30 or 40 years. And so we're very focused on trying to streamline the interactions that we have, not only through application and award, but also beyond that during the life cycle of a development. And we are working, and we've done an incredible amount of work already with the Department of Housing and the Commissioner, as well as our other partners at DEEP and the State Housing Preservation Office and other state agencies to try to be a lot more coordinated in our efforts so that you're not finding that we're replicating work unnecessarily. I cannot promise you that we will get to all of your asks in the first year, but we're going to be looking at all of your pain points and finding the ones that are most impactful so we can bring relief fast. I'm also interested in reestablishing the Multifamily Advisory Group in order to have consistent feedback from you all about how we're doing and pitch you new ideas as we have them so that we can go into our process improvement having confidence that our changes are going to be meaningful to you. Before I hand it off to the folks that are going to be speaking after me, I just want to make sure that you understand that we are very interested in hearing from you today. The QAP is obviously just one of the resources, but it's also one of the most important resources that we have at our disposal. And we've heard from you over and over again that you want to know about changes to the QAP far in advance. That works for us as well, because then we get to plan our work accordingly. And so with that in mind, we wanted to take advantage of this conference today to ask for your feedback about how we might design the QAP in 21, 22, and in the years ahead, because honestly, having a QAP that changes annually doesn't work for anybody. It's a lot of work, and you have to keep reinventing the wheel every time the QAP changes. On the other hand, we want to be really thoughtful, because if we're going to settle on a QAP that's going to be good for 3 to 5 years, it has to actually make strides in the areas that we think we need to increase affordable housing opportunities. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Terry Nash Giovannucci and Masouda Omar, who are going to be leading a conversation on the QAP. Thank you very much today for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Nandini. So appreciate you joining us today. That was a really excellent overview of really what's going on at CHFA. As a board member, I think you hit all the really key high points and provided a great foundation for the discussion we're about to have, led by Terry and Masouda, as Nandini noted. Before we run into that, I just want to talk quickly about how we're going to handle Q&A and that sort of thing for this session. So this is the CHFA listening session on what's next for the 2022 QAP. I announced our primary sponsors for the conference earlier: Melville, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, Department of Housing, Department of Housing, Housing Enterprises, Inc., and Whittlesey. And the session sponsor for this session is, not surprisingly, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. So Thank you again for being our lead sponsor and throughout the conference. And thank you, Nandini, too, for your kind words. I hope others have found these sessions informative and helpful also. We have a few more to go today. Again, just noting for you that this session is being recorded, so you'll have access to it, as Nandini noted, afterwards on our website. You're going to remain muted through this session, which is a little tricky since it's a listening session. So the way we're going to do this is, if you have feedback that you'd like to provide, please use the raise hand function, and I will be doing my best to monitor that. So as Masouda and Terry walk us through some questions and information, if you have feedback that you'd like to provide, use that raise hand function, and I will do my best to call on you, and then I can selectively unmute you. Alternatively, if for some reason the raise hand function isn't working for you, or you'd like to provide feedback in a written format, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So again, you can use the raise hand function to speak, or you can put, if you're having an issue with that, you can put your feedback in the Q&A, or just note in the Q&A that you'd like to be called on. And then finally, before the end of the session, we will launch a poll that asks for some feedback about this session. We hope that you will take 30 seconds to do that, as well as a link to the survey that we'll post in the chat window. The survey is for our state affordable housing advocacy campaign. For those of you who aren't familiar, Home Connecticut has been around since 2004, and we're going through a restructure and replanning of that campaign. And we'd really like your feedback and thoughts on affordable housing advocacy in the state of Connecticut. So if you are able to take that 5-minute survey, it will really help us move our work forward. So with that, and again, as I noted in the beginning, any tech issues, just throw them in that chat window. So with that, I will turn this back over to Terry and Masouda. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Masouda Omar with the Multifamily Department. I joined CHFA about 9 months ago. I was with the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority for over 20 years. I also want to take a minute to thank Kylie, Chelsea, and the entire team for organizing this conference, as well as the opportunity to be with you this morning. As you know, the tax credit program is the most powerful tool that's out there in the production and preservation of affordable housing, not only in Connecticut, but across the nation. As the allocating agency for this program, we take great pride to serve as the steward of this program and to advance CHFA's mission. And so we use the QAP really as our roadmap and how we allocate credits. It incorporates states' policies, tax credit guidelines, as well as CHFA's requirements. And I know Nandini touched on the strategic plan and and our vision going forward. So this is a very timely conversation. We're interested in your feedback. This is really the first of many listening sessions that we will have with you. We look forward to your ideas, input, and suggestions that you have, and how we can be part of this collective solution in really making a difference in the state. So with that said, Kylie, can you advance to the next slide? Or I guess one more. So this is our agenda. I mean, I touched on as far as the QAP framework. We'll facilitate a conversation as far as kind of what's being envisioned, and then taking your suggestions and ideas. And I'm going to have Terry Nash kind of facilitate that conversation for us. Next slide. So I want to just do a quick plug. I know this e-blast went out, but this is also the time to seek input on the LIHTC program. So that window is from November 23rd through December 23rd. And again, we really encourage you to not only give us feedback during this session, but you can also email or write to us any feedback that you have as we go forward. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Nash.
Thanks, Masouda. I want to just welcome everyone who's attending today. I know many of you, and some I don't know, and I'm happy to be meeting you today. I'm with CHFA now close to 18 years. I've been in many different roles, from asset management to underwriting, planning, and now community engagement. I'm very proud to be with CHFA, and I'm continually impressed with the passion and commitment of our development partners and community. So testament to the number of folks who are here today. We're looking forward to getting your feedback on our plans, and so we'll be sharing with you some ideas that we have and looking for your reactions. Anything positive, negative, however you feel, that's what we're looking for. And we'll be looking for that throughout the year. So there's multiple opportunities for engagement. We're hosting additional listening sessions, and this input session that's the public comment period, this input comment period that's underway now are just the beginning. Next slide. One of the things that we've been thinking, and Nandini mentioned it earlier, the timing of the QAP has been challenging. So first thing we wanted to do was align the program year, the application due date, with the year of available credits and the governing QAP. So the next LIHTC application due date that we're proposing will be in January of 2022. So the QAP would be for 2022 and the credit ceiling would be for 2022. So there'd be no more of the application year concept with different years of credits. We have hopes that this additional time, it's not really going to cost too much. Maybe you would normally have applied in November of 21. Instead, it's January of 22. And ideally, there'll be even more lead time than we had previously provided, so, from the QAP to the application due date. So this is idea number one. Chelsea, if you could advance the slides. And also, I believe Nandini mentioned this too. We are looking to streamline and simplify wherever we possibly can. I think Masouda mentioned process improvements, and we're looking to combine the multiple guidelines we have now that inform the QAP. They're just as important. They may contain a lot of information that are going to help you to be successful with your application, but they're somewhat scattered. So we'd like to combine the guidelines and the glossary with the QAP, removing duplicative information, perhaps including, policy where policy is intended to be in the procedures and the QAP itself. We're looking to simplify the consolidated application, excuse me, which has grown over time and could benefit from some streamlining. We would like to have the QAP in effect for multiple years, which again brings up the point that we need to be extremely thoughtful in what we create today if it's going to be impactful for the next multiple number of years, 2, 3, 5, however long it may be. We don't want to be tweaking or looking at it again. It's going to be something that we have to be very careful on how we design now. Again, we'll need your input. And then one of the other things that we haven't been as successful in doing in the past is testing QAP criteria. We do look at data, but I think it's most important now that we match the policy goals that are in existence with the community that's to be impacted to measure the outcomes. So it's a little bit more, it's a sort of a triangular look. If you could advance, Chelsea. The timing of these revisions is, again, expanded a little bit. And so I just wanted to go over that with folks so you have an idea of where we are. We're in the fourth quarter of 2020. We've already begun listening sessions and work group meetings, this being the first listening session, but the work group meetings we have underway include the opportunity work group and a work group on sustainability. These have been designed to have a broad reach around the industry, get multiple perspectives, so it's not any one voice being above another, and we're able to be getting a lot of good information on what we can potentially recommend as input to the board's task force. I think most of you know that it's the CHFA board's task force that really works on pulling together the input from the various sources to, vet what staff is providing and give its blessing for the QAP. As we move into the first quarter of 21, we'll begin discussions on QAP revisions potentially proposed with that board's task force. We'll meet regularly after each board meeting and potentially with special meetings if needed. Notice will be provided for those as well. We're looking forward to continuing to convene work groups and community listening sessions. Whenever we can get feedback, in whatever way we can get feedback, we're looking to do so. And for the foreseeable future, it appears that we'll be doing a lot of Zoom meetings, which is fine. I miss the days when we can get together and really have a conversation. Next slide.
Terry, before I advance, I'm just noting that your audio is going a bit in and out for folks. It seems to be better when you're leaning in a little bit closer to your computer. So let's try that.
Okay.
We'll see if that works better.
Okay. All right. Is this better? Hopefully.
So far, so good.
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. All right. So we're looking at potentially for the second quarter of 2021, presenting a draft QAP for 2022 and beyond, along with the associated red line of changes that will need to occur to the LIHTC procedures so that they match. That would be initially for a public comment period approval that takes place the following month, and then we would potentially have another focus group or two and be able to handle that in the April-May timeframe, still the spring as we had in the past. Next slide. June would get us to a point where we could have the QAP either finally approved by the board or potentially sent back out for public comment. Next slide. If there are sufficient public comments that require a new draft and further revisions, that June board meeting would be the time to present the revised draft, and it would be approved in July. Again, looking for the governor's signature in August. That essentially would mirror the current time frame. So our hope is that through these listening sessions and the engagement with the community, that everyone has an idea of where we're going so that when we create a red line, it's not going to engender a lot of changes. It will be what's expected and will be able to be complete in June. And that would give folks, full 6 months from the QAP final board approval to the application due date. Next slide. Can you, one more time? So to that end, we're looking for your feedback. And in this particular session, we had a few topics, maybe 5 or 6 topics that we particularly wanted to hear from you about. The first would be, how do we balance new construction with the need to preserve existing affordable housing stock? This could be related to the way we set aside credits. It could be classifications. We thought about potentially having a new construction and a preservation classification instead of the current, which has been in place for a number of years. But anything you suggest is open to consideration. So with the goal of balancing new construction, we know we need a lot of new housing units. We know through the housing inventory data analysis that was completed recently that there's a shortage everywhere, particularly with the very deepest and lowest income households. But it's everywhere. So how do we balance the new construction need with the preservation of existing affordable housing stock? And I'd open it to comments. If you have something you want to jot down, put it in the Q&A if you'd like to raise your hand and speak. Would love to hear from you. This is a listening session, so we did want to listen.
Right, and again, as a reminder, you can use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can enter feedback anonymously through that, as well as just written feedback under your own name. And in order to speak and have this be a real listening session, we're encouraging folks to use that hand raise function, and I'm monitoring the window so I can unmute you if you raise your hand. Okay, Terry, I see a comment from Maureen about supporting targeted criteria for new construction, substantial renovation, and then a third category for moderate renovation. That's in the chat.
Yeah, Maureen.
If you have feedback, again, if it's possible to put it in the Q&A, that'll help us consolidate rather than the chat window.
So I'll throw out some more ideas that we can think about. Again, nothing is too crazy. Think outside the box. Whatever is on your mind, be comfortable to say it. Everyone has an equal voice. We're wondering if we know that we need to have new units, and at the same time, we recognize that there's a deterioration in a lot of our existing affordable housing stock. How do we manage the two often competing needs? What are your thoughts on having, instead of having public housing and general class, what are your thoughts about having new construction as one class and preservation as the other class, and we try to split it between the two? And it doesn't have to be 50-50, it could be a different percentage. And what would that percentage be? And if we were doing that, would we then also look at location? You can see where it kind of my mind snowballs with these things. It's kind of, you can go from one to another to another. What do you think about doing this kind of work?
And again, I see some more feedback coming in the chat. If you could put your feedback in the Q&A as opposed to the Q&A icon at the bottom as opposed to the chat icon, that would be helpful for us. But Amanda Kennedy notes there's a lot of interest by municipalities in preserving so-called naturally occurring affordable housing. I don't know how feasible that is and question whether those units are affordable to their current residents. And then Mark Shelburne notes, could suggest different criteria for scoring new and rehab and separate set-asides. That's a suggestion for Terry.
Yes. And that's a really interesting concept, because we've noted that sometimes you try to fit a round peg into a square hole. It just isn't happening. When you've got a preservation deal, it's in a specific location, it's not going to get points for, let's say it's not going to get points for its location because it is where it is. So what if we were to say, you've got new construction preservation. Underneath each one, you've got sub-classifications with urban and non-urban. And then we design the QAP to have points incentives associated with each classification or each geography sub-classification, so that we're not disenfranchising one applicant over another, but at the same time, it's not the same exact criteria, but it's what's meaningful to incentivize the types of developments we recognize we need. What do you think about that?
A lot of feedback coming in the Q&A icon. If you're interested in actually speaking, you can raise your hand and I can call on you. Or if you can't find your hand function, just note that in the Q&A that you'd like to speak as well. Further support for Terry, I see, for dividing rehab between substantial rehab and preservation.
So that's a good point. We do see significant gut rehab work, and at the same time we see somewhat more moderate rehab work, and
Right.
the two are not the same. In many cases, say in the instance of an adaptive reuse, that's new construction. Maybe there's a different way to look at the real gut rehab work.
Let's see, a couple comments here from Dara about trying to save 9% for high cost projects, either new construction or deals that are truly at risk. And then also a comment about geographic set asides, not making as much sense in a small state. You can see I'm just scrolling through.
Well, to Dara's point, that is a very good idea of making sure that we're targeting the 9% for the really higher cost, potentially new construction. And then if we were to adjust the way we think about 4%, maybe they're not as expensive or demanding on the soft resources that we need, and they could be directed more toward some of the rehab work or the rehab deals. Some thoughts.
Yeah, further support noting preservation of public housing units must remain a priority of any equity-based approach, which I think is an interesting note. Revitalization of urban centers should be treated in one way. New opportunities in new areas should be treated in another way, which Terry's, kind of trends toward this track of rehab and preservation in some areas and maybe new construction in other areas where we haven't seen as much development.
That's another, we'll be talking about that a little bit more too, because some of these just sort of flow together, and you can see there's a lot of different things we can do in incentivizing, and part of it is determining what exactly we want to accomplish. And then the second part is making sure that the development community is on board and engaged, because there's only a certain amount of time that you have to do what we need to do. And we just need to be as creative as we can. We don't necessarily have to just use tax credits. If we use tax credits and we can leverage them with other sources, and we're working on that internally, trying to figure out how to resource some of these developments.
I'm seeing a lot of different feedback come in on a variety of different topics. So if I'm not mentioning what you said, again, feel free to raise your hand if it's something you want to press. Otherwise, some of these I know Terry's going to be bringing up in other questions. So
yeah, exactly. I will say, I'm so very happy that you've put a lot of things in the Q&A, because we can save this transcript and we will also have the recording. But it was noted more than once that new construction can be part of preservation. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and they can complement one another. And it also depends on where you're doing the work. Sometimes that's the only way you're going to get new units is by doing preservation and adding some new. So that's great feedback, and I really appreciate that. Let's move on to the next question and see if we can talk a little bit about cost efficiencies, because this has been a challenge for the development community in CHFA and DOH for a number of years, but it's getting even tighter. How can we ensure reasonable cost efficiencies while building durable and sustainable affordable housing? Obviously, we want our developments to be viable for the long term, but how can we do that with reasonable costs without somehow creating a need for, additional expenses that aren't necessary? Here is where your expertise is going to shine. So those of you who do this work, what can we do to help you to make the most cost efficient and not cheap? When I say cost efficient, I don't mean like put together an inferior building product. I mean, how can we do the best we can do at the best possible rate? We'll be talking about this in future listening sessions as well, but it's something to think about. There has to be some thought given to what is required to put together an application and to build the development. And is there anything that we're currently requiring or that's included that doesn't necessarily need to be, or that drives up costs? That's number one. You know, we may say, I don't know, because you ask for XYZ, it costs us this much more. And maybe that's something we need to live with because it's something that's critically important, and maybe it's something that's not. So again, your feedback will help with this question. If nobody has any particular comments at the moment and you want to come back to it, we certainly can. But it does seem like you are the experts and would know what is happening. Why are costs going higher than we might expect them to, given the material shortages or whatever? We can understand what's in the market, but at the same time, we're recognizing that there aren't necessarily the efficiencies we might expect.
Comments about, let's see, modeling costs during application can be a burden for projects that are ultimately not moving forward. Maureen notes other states require applicants to commit to achieving energy savings, but not necessarily to do as rigorous upfront modeling until projects are awarded. Again, some more comments along the lines of the application process itself being expensive in contrast to the number of tax credits available. And then more comment. There's been several comments throughout the thread around sustainability, passive house.
I think there was a point made there that's very important, and hopefully we're addressing it with our streamlining, that the application process itself has become somewhat cumbersome and may potentially be a cost driver. And we didn't intend for that. We certainly don't want that. And as we're looking to streamline and revisit some of our requirements, the consolidated application, and the time that is needed to complete, there may be some ability to achieve efficiencies in that way. And there's also, what do you think about having, you used to do this a long time ago, but what do you think about having a preliminary sort of, we've started to do a little bit of this with the developer engagement process, but what do you think about having a preliminary, this is what my application is going to be. If you're not interested, I'm not going to go forward. And if you are interested, I will. It wouldn't have a full underwriting necessarily, but you know, it might be a way. I think it's done in some other states that way, where there's a 2 application process. You know, if applications are due in January, then maybe you would have come in, I don't know, the prior spring to say, does this look like I should even bother, or should I go back to the drawing board, or do I need to tweak it? Does anybody have any experience with that kind of a application process? And do you think that would be better or worse? And again, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying we would move that way necessarily, but we're looking to make it easier for you to apply. And we don't want it to be as cumbersome or burdensome as it may be perceived to be by virtue of the people doing the work, because you're doing the work, you know what it takes.
Yeah, and Charlie Adams noting here that Massachusetts, similarly, as you noted, Terry, has a pre-application process for exactly the reasons we're describing here about application costs. Others echoing that's a great idea. Some comments too around life cycle costs related to climate change and other components, and not just construction costs in terms of evaluating sustainability being a critical component. But as far as as the pre-application, there's some support in the comments. Again, folks, feel free to let us know if you have something you'd like to speak about. Sometimes that's easier than typing it out, and we're happy to unmute you for that purpose.
All right, well, that's encouraging, and I think something that we'll investigate then. It does sound like there's receptivity to moving forward with some form of a pre-app or basing our activities on Massachusetts experience and seeing what they do. So no sense in, I'm not ashamed to steal another state's good work. I think, why reinvent the wheel if somebody else is doing it well? We have a number of colleagues that we work with and share best practices. So we continue to do that and try to improve what we're doing.
Yep, and just some cautionary comments in here too about that you may want to take into consideration. Just noting that pre-apps have to be good at saying no to some projects or sending them away to probably reconsider as opposed to just passing through all. Some noting that prior DOH CHFA pre-application process wasn't super effective, so we may want to look at those comments and take them under consideration.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can we go to the next question? So this is also looking at not only opportunity areas, but the towns that don't particularly see a lot of activity. How can we incentivize housing development in areas that are historically underserved? Yes, I know there's the zoning issues in a lot of the suburban locations. I know there's some towns that have no multifamily permitted, but others don't. There's other ways I'm hoping that we can incentivize development in those areas, not necessarily all down the transit corridor, but close by. So we'd love to get out into the Eastern Connecticut rural area, more of Litchfield County, but a lot of those towns don't have infrastructure. So I'm not trying to narrow our pool. I'm just saying, I recognize that there are some reasons why we don't go into some of these locations that we'd like to. But having said that, thinking creatively and outside the box, and again, anything goes. How can we incentivize housing development in areas that are historically underserved? Is it more community activism? Is it more a longer lead time to work with the community and the local municipality to get the buy-in that's needed? What would help? How do we encourage this type of development? The need is everywhere. It's completely statewide. I don't think there's a single town that didn't show up in our analysis.
So one comment here about regionalizing housing authorities' ability to develop outside their zone. This is something that's been talked about for several years as one possible way to advance the question you were talking about.
Did someone raise their hand, perhaps?
Dara noting from experience, when a project has succeeded through 830G, make sure they can get awarded. Charlie, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Charlie.
All right, I think I'll break the ice. I'll be the one to talk on this one.
Thank you.
This is such a challenging question, and I often, I think it's difficult for CHFA to incentivize this. I mean, as developers, we're always looking to go into markets where where we aren't already. It just helps from a marketing, from a lease-up perspective. I mean, those are the places we all want to be. We all want to be in underserved markets, not overserved markets, for just those reasons. I think it's really about the tools, the other sort of state tools. Dara just mentioned in the comments about 30G. We all know about 40B in Massachusetts. Is there anything that 40B can be used to be more like 30G? I know that in Massachusetts as well, some of the agencies could actually go out and do consulting work with towns to help get them comfortable on, some of their town-owned parcels. So I think, those would be the places that, I don't know, Terry, if you're thinking about the QAP trying to incentivize developers to go into those towns, it's more getting those towns really to want, and obviously the zoning issues we've all heard about extensively.
So it sounds like it's more work that has to happen foundationally, outside the QAP, but with.
Yeah, I have trouble seeing how the QAP could
Right.
be used to incentivize that, because it's not that developers don't want to go there. It's just that the towns don't want to have us.
Right.
Right. So how do you square that circle? What are some of the state fiscal tools that could be used to incentivize towns?
And that's
the other things that have been looked at, like, smart growth, right? 40R and other things.
And what's interesting, when we look at smart growth and things like that in Connecticut, it tends to be very small because of where it's going. 4 units, a couple of duplexes, and that's not serving our purpose here, and it's not getting us. Well, it's wonderful. It's not getting us where we want to be. So
yeah,
that's really a point well taken. And when you mentioned what could the state do, outside of CHFA, what could the state do to provide some leveraging or incentivizing to municipalities to want to participate or to.
Yeah, I just feel that's where the solution has to lie.
That's a good point.
I see some more comments in here along the lines of working with towns. Amanda, others noting that, for some of these towns, seeing a project that's maybe smaller scale or lower density and seeing what that looks like, which is something I think many of us here have worked to try to promote over the years, but that can be one opportunity, noting that RPA guidebook on affordable housing plans will have some of that too, but working with towns to really look at what's appropriate from a density standpoint. Let's see, something else I saw here that I wanted to raise, but the infrastructure costs, again, as you noted, Terry, is something that keeps coming. I don't know if the opportunity fund may be something that could help with that too. I don't want to commit to that because I'm not sure whether that's allowable or not, but just, I know there's been pushes before in the state legislature from the partnership and others to try to identify state resources to overcome some of those infrastructure hurdles, and make more resources available for projects that are moving forward in areas that don't have sewer or sidewalk, road cuts, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. All right, let's do the next question then. That's very helpful information. This is somewhat related, but not entirely. Opportunity and racial equity. How can we ensure that developments are built where opportunities are greatest? And this isn't to say that we want to abandon the cities and the work that needs to be done there, but simply to provide options for folks and to have the ability to move into communities with the tremendous opportunities that would benefit everyone. And we're looking for racial equity. Our current, and I don't want to go too deep into the opportunity mapping because the next session we'll be talking a lot about opportunity mapping and presenting new work on that in that regard, a result of the opportunity work group. But the past 5 years, we've made a real effort with opportunity characteristics to try to drive development into those communities, and we've had marginal success. It's not what we were hoping for. And so recognizing that weakness, what can we do? Does this tie back to, again, the community engagement, the planning, the work with the municipalities that has to occur outside the QAP? Is there anything that we can do through the QAP? We have the opportunity map that sort of, this is very thoughtfully presented. And if you haven't signed up for the next session, I'm going to give a shameless plug and say, please do, because there was a lot of work put into developing a new map that will be shared by DOH and CHFA if it's adopted. And because right now it's, it's still in the works. But that is the concept. We wanted to have one map that both agencies are using. And there was a lot of thought and research done into the criteria that would be used to build the opportunity areas. And it's census-based, census tract-based, not by towns like we used to do. So there's some differences. Will it help? I hope so. And is there anything else we could do?
And we'll put a link to that next session in the chat window during this session, Terry, so folks can sign up if they want to see that link and learn about opportunity mapping in the next session.
Thank you.
At 11:30.
Is Carol Martin able to speak to that?
Yep. Carol, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Carol, you're all set if you.
Okay, sorry about that. So Terry, I just, for you and the benefit of everyone participating, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority has invested via 9% and 4% tax credits into 2 developments with the Westport Housing Authority. It started back 10 years ago with Hales Court and most recently with Sasko Creek. And what I do want folks to know is it does the investment into communities like Westport. The diversity of our student body is now changing and we're actually tracking it. So for whatever reason, I just want you folks to know that the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, at least in my community that I work in Westport, has had a tremendous impact in addressing opportunity for minority families. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. We don't have enough operational data at this juncture to be able to say that. So the anecdotal evidence is really appreciated.
Just some questions on the opportunity mapping, but as we note, those may be better answered in the next session, but some notes about supporting the opportunity map, encouraging getting feedback on the criteria moving forward. Amanda with a comment here, which I've certainly heard outside this as well, that monitoring compliance of affordability plans for many towns that don't have a lot of units, which we're talking about here in the context of promoting more racial equity, promoting more options, as you noted, that oversight of those plans is not good in those towns that don't have a lot of units and the infrastructure to create them. So suggesting maybe higher levels of ongoing oversight to make sure that affordability is maintained in those places.
We've heard folks suggest that naturally occurring affordable housing in some of the suburban towns is addressing some of this need. But I don't believe that's necessarily the case. While it's wonderful that there is some housing that's affordable to the residents, it doesn't necessarily offer opportunity for anyone to move into town. It's often kind of a closed circle around who moves into that in-law apartment or that accessory dwelling unit, or the 2-family that is owned by a neighbor. So when we're thinking about building opportunity and racial equity, it really is going to be about the opportunity mapping and seeing how we can get into other towns. And I think we would be well served to look into how we can engage with the communities, how the state can help us in that engagement, and see if the new mapping doesn't help move us a little bit closer to our goal. All right. Let's move to the next question. All right, so this is kind of an exciting new concept that we have, is innovation, an innovation development, or some aspirational goals. So what can we do through the QAP to drive innovation and achieve aspirational goals? These could be bold, audacious goals. They could be something as simple as, let's do some elderly housing in a world of family housing, you know. But what are your thoughts on what would be innovative, exciting, aspirational that we could achieve through the QAP? And it's likely going to be something that's more expensive and require the 9% credits. Is it by virtue of location, by population, by, you know, sustainability measures? I mean, there could be any number of things that might speak to innovation. And then there could be other things that I haven't even thought about, but that you have. And especially if you have experience in other states or you have experience in your development aspirations of your own, what would you think that we could do through the QAP to help further some of that? I mean, all development is exciting, don't get me wrong. I loved it as an underwriter. I love it still. I think it's very fulfilling to work on a development and the development process. But what can we do to make it more, I don't know, to make it new and different, to achieve some real policy goals, some aspirational goals that we haven't been able to do before?
Maybe too, for those of you who are working in places outside Connecticut, what have you seen on that note to Terry's end that might be a good best practice to import? Let's see, incentives for multi-generational housing.
I like that. Does Dara have any thoughts on it? I know she has some experience with
Yep.
different types of projects.
Go ahead, Dara. You should be able to.
Yes. Yeah. Hi. How's it going? Hi, Terry.
Hi, Dara.
Yeah. On this one, I mean, you guys must. I'm sure you know this because I know you track your peer organizations. Pennsylvania has had their innovation award for, I think, many years now in place. I think it serves a couple of purposes. One is obviously to kind of allow for things that are a little outside the box and might not sort of traditionally look like a straight up 9% deal in our kind of normal way of thinking. So it gives them a little more, I think, discretion on the part of the leadership at CHFA. We just won the Innovation Award last year in Pennsylvania for a highly regenerative and very active community center where we were renovating a historic synagogue and creating a new community center there, along with pretty high aspirational goals around regeneration of construction materials, as well as a urban garden and all this other stuff. But it just gives some ability for CHFA to pick things that look a little different from sort of a traditional deal. And I think it's worked really well in Pennsylvania. I think there are a couple of other states that do that. But I think we had suggested maybe even last year's in our comments, like a director's choice kind of idea where, somebody decides, like, again, this may not score because it doesn't have like all the supportive housing points, or it doesn't have all of this points or that points, or it costs a little more, but it's a great project. And I think that kind of discretion is probably warranted for deals that fit other priorities.
Thank you. And that makes a world of sense. I remember that suggestion. We liked that. It's an exciting thought that we could be able to move something forward that otherwise wouldn't happen, but that has really merits.
Yeah.
Really?
I think there's other hands raised.
Yep. Charlie Adams.
Yeah, I want to jump in because I wanted to completely echo or ditto whatever Dara just said on that. I think that's absolutely the way to do it. I think that to do the innovation, you can't use points to try to do it, because by its nature, innovation is going to be outside points, going to be stuff we didn't think of. And I think further to the point, I think some of the point structure now actually might, and it's hard to figure out how to do this, but does sometimes discourage the innovation, right? So for example, in terms of like cost and cost effectiveness, if you start putting in things that are ancillary to the to the residential units, it's going to drive up costs and it won't score as well. So that's, I don't know how to exactly square that circle, but that's something to be thinking about, how can you promote innovation even within the point structure that currently exists and not discourage it? Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And it raises the question of, is innovation or an innovation round outside of the traditional scoring? And is it the executive director's pick, or is it a committee of the board task force and the executive director? I mean, there's lots of different ways you can slice and dice, but it is a very exciting thought to think that something that has merit and is really meeting a lot of policy goals may be able to be achieved. If it didn't score, wasn't successful, the other ones floated away, and you've got the remainder, you say this one really has to happen, and the executive director can nominate it for an innovation award.
Yeah.
An exciting concept.
Yeah, I would think of it as not as a round, but as if there were an innovative deal that had applied in a round, it would be sort of outside of the normal scoring criteria. So, and there may be rounds when there's nothing innovative that comes in, so it doesn't have to be.
True.
Yeah, I would say in the round as well. I don't think it has to be outside the round.
Exactly.
And seeing more support in the comments for either a separate innovation round of funding or in some way sort of bifurcating those innovation concepts from the QAP itself, as well as some other ideas around sustainability, carbon use intensity, and incentivizing other things like green space, playgrounds, and community centers more. Let's see. Can extraordinary costs be more broadly defined in order to catalyze leverage innovation?
I know we are looking at what other states are doing in this realm, and I think Colorado is also engaged in an innovation award. For Colorado, it's not necessarily the executive director's pick, so it's two different concepts that could be the same. It's instead of having a executive director's pick, a committee might review, or you could combine the two and say the executive director's pick is going to be an innovation award if there is one that merits that award. And to Dara's point, it doesn't have to happen every year if there's not something that rises to that level. Any number of things, as were mentioned in the chat and in the Q&A, could warrant being considered for an innovative award. But I guess that also remains to be whittled down, and we can do that through other, research and listening sessions and see what exactly can be achieved. What would meet our policy goals? Nandini mentioned the new strategic plan. There are some, significant goals around development and engaging with other partners and moving things forward to serve the needs of the residents of the state of Connecticut broadly. What's our next question, Chelsea? Okay. So this, we wanted to think about the populations that we're serving, because we've been focused on families for a number of years, and probably, every year in every public comment period, we hear, what about the elderly housing? Can we do some elderly housing? And I'm not denying that there's a real need for elderly housing, but I'd love to hear from you as the development community, what you think is really the most efficient use of the resource. Do we continue with family housing where it's non-age restricted, where family housing is non-age restricted and anyone can live there, including elderly individuals and families? Or do we say, some folks just don't want to be in a family housing situation and we should have some elderly housing developments? The downside of the elderly housing development itself, which I think is one of the reasons we moved away from it, is that towns that would not do multifamily will do multifamily elderly, but not multifamily family developments. And, it wasn't helping us achieve our goals of broadening the opportunity for folks to move from one area to an area that had more resources. So what are your thoughts on the family versus elderly housing concept? Maybe this is an issue that's finally just sort of resolved itself. If no one feels strongly that we should still continue doing elderly housing, that's okay too.
We have a hand up. Go ahead, Paul. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea if I did that first. Thank you. Yeah, I have some other comments that I'll submit in writing too, but as far as the senior housing is concerned, Terry, I understand your point, and you're absolutely correct that that was what was taking place, that a lot of towns were allowing senior housing and the families housing wasn't happening. But I think there's also a lot of need out there for it. And so I don't think that it should be completely eliminated from the QAP the way it is right now. I mean, maybe it's a proportion of it, or there's a consideration for certain projects or certain areas that will have senior housing and maybe some that don't. But I think that completely eliminating it, I think is definitely posing some hardships on certain clients and definitely on the population.
Sure, that's good comments. And I think in general, while the QAP doesn't prohibit senior housing, the point structure is such that it's disincentivized. So
Exactly.
You know, we may get one elderly housing development each year or every other year that's successful simply because they did passive house and supportive housing, let's say.
Right, that might,
That'll
allow
do it.
them to move
That'll do it,
forward.
right?
Right,
Yeah.
but that, but again, when we're talking about that in passive house, which I also have got some, a lot that I've done with you already on that and more that will come. I think that that's kind of trying to come into a program by, a different method. And, and I don't still think it's serving the whole population. I think you're right about what you're trying to do here. You're looking at innovation, you're looking at cross-section of the entire state, you're looking at all these things. And I think that, I don't think you can strictly look at geography and income without looking at the total population, which includes the seniors.
Gotcha. Thank you. It's challenging in Connecticut. We're a small state. We can't really slice and dice by geography. It's not like
Right.
say, this area is going to be family housing and this area is going to be elderly. We just try to encourage the broadest spectrum that we possibly can to serve all of the residents in the state. And that's a pretty tall order. This QAP, as I mentioned earlier, we want to have in place for multiple years. So it's extremely important that we're thoughtful now in how we're developing it and what our aspirations are, what our goals are, so that we don't need to change it. We don't need to come back and say, oh, we just need to tweak this so that we can get that. No, we want it to be, something that's been vetted by everyone in the industry, that everyone is comfortable with where we're going, and that it's going to remain in place and drive the production that will satisfy not only our strategic plan, but the state's goals and the policies, all while staying within the confines of the Internal Revenue Code and the requirements that come with and the 9% and 4% credits. So, we are getting close to 11. Does anyone have any last thoughts on any of these topics that we brought up? And remember, we will be having additional sessions. If there's something that you particularly want to talk about, please let me know, and we can convene something with one of those topics as well. We also have again, I'm going to say the input session. Email your comments to publiccomment@chfa.org. no S in there. I monitor that email box and we will get your comments, and we're looking very much forward to hearing from you. We get a lot of thoughtful comments, which is what we're looking for, and we are so appreciative of that. This listening session itself might have felt a little awkward in that it wasn't like able to be like a free-flowing conversation as we've been able to do in the past, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate your participation, both through speaking and through the Q&A and putting your opinions forward. Every thought is welcome. I stress that. There's no one that's going to be more important or viewed more highly than another. So whatever you have on your mind, please share it. And we want to create the best QAP that's most responsive that we possibly can. If there's any last thoughts on any of these questions, please share.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining today. Thank you, Terry, Masouda, Nandini. We have posted the link in the chat window for the next session on opportunity mapping, which came up today. So join that if you'd like. I'll be launching a poll momentarily to provide feedback on this session. So love to have your take on that. And thank you again for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Kylie, can I just make a comment? And I have a quick question for everyone. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you for everyone's participation. Your thoughts were, and the feedback that you shared with us is extremely valuable, and we greatly appreciate it, and we will take it into consideration as we work on the revisions. And Terry, thank you. You did a great job facilitating the discussion this morning. I do have a quick question. So is there one thing that you like us to continue to do? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but is there one thing that you like us to continue to do or not do? So I know we have just a few minutes left, so I would love some additional thoughts on that question.
Sure, thanks, Masouda. And folks, feel free to post that in the Q&A function. If you'd like to raise your hand and speak, we have a couple of minutes left. We could do that too. So far, just a lot of appreciation for hosting this to both of you. So thanks again. Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. I look forward to receiving your written comments as well and to seeing you at future events.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great morning.